Hello, hello.
भाई अस्सलाम वालेकुम। आवाज आ रही है?
अस्सलाम।
चलो ठीक है।
अस्सलाम वालेकुम मैम।
वालेकुम अस्सलाम। अब्दुल्ला अनम्यूट करो। वालेकुम। Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, beta. Sadaf, how are you?
I am fine.
Uh, Abdullah?
Abdullah is here.
Yes, ma'am. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. I see Dr. Shanawaz is also here. Assalamu alaikum, Shanawaz Mia.
Dr. Abdullah, Dr. Brandon has joined in.
Assalamu alaikum. May peace, mercy, and blessings of Almighty God be on all of you. Good morning to all of you, and good evening to Professor Brandon, sir. It is
Hello.
10:30 p.m. in the night, but still he has joined us.
Yes.
So, to begin the session, I would like to invite Imam Sahab to recite the verses from Holy Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تأكلوا أموالكم بينكم بالباطل إلا أن تكون تجارة عن تراض منكم ولا تقتلوا أنفسكم إن الله كان بكم رحيما ومن يفعل ذلك عدوانا وظلما فسوف نصليه نارا وكان ذلك على الله يسيرا. وقال الله سبحانه وتعالى في سورة الشعراء: إذ قال لهم أخوهم شعيب ألا تتقون إني لكم رسول أمين فاتقوا الله وأطيعون وما أسألكم عليه من أجر إن أجري إلا على رب العالمين. أوفوا الكيل ولا تكونوا من المخسرين وزنوا بالقسطاس المستقيم ولا تبخسوا الناس أشياءهم ولا تعثوا في الأرض مفسدين واتقوا الذي خلقكم والجبلة الأولين. صدق الله العظيم.
Now, translation: O believers of God, do not consume one another's wealth unjustly, but rather by doing business of mutual agreement. And do not kill yourself or one another. Indeed, Almighty God is always merciful to you. And whoever does that in aggression and injustice, then we will drive him into a fire. And that is easy for Almighty God. When Prophet Shoaib, peace be upon him, said to them, will you not fear Almighty God? Indeed, I am to you a trustworthy messenger from your Lord. So fear Almighty God and obey me. And I do not ask you for it any payment. My payment is only from Lord of the worlds. Give full measure in business and do not be among losers. And Weight the product with correct scale and do not deprive people of their due rights and do not commit abuse on earth, spreading corruption and fear he who created you and the former creations. Now I would like to invite Professor Dr. Reshma Nasreen ma'am for opening remarks for the session.
Good morning, everyone in India, and good evening, sir. I'm Reshma Nasreen. I'm working in the Department of Management, and today, uh, because of some unfortunate circumstances, our head could not join. So I have taken on the responsibility of introducing this international webinar. So as you would have seen that we start the session with the name of God. That is more, the intent is that while we do any work, we should know that there is some superpower above you and we should work accordingly. We should not go to the wrong path because someone is there who is monitoring each one of us. And that is why we start every, and it is not a religious sentiment, it is more like there is someone who is keeping an eye on you on all your activities. So I like to be, I think most of us are from Jamia Hamdard, but for you, I like to just give a brief about our institution. Jamia Hamdard, the word Hamdard means compassion, and Jamia stands for university. So our founder, Janab Hakim Sahab, he started this university. It was his endeavor to bring education to all the stratas of the society and particularly those who could not afford education, because he believed that education is the light which will dispel the darkness of ignorance and propel the people towards the path of empowerment. And that is the essence of Jamia Hamdard. We provide education to all, and we have at the present we have got 9 schools, and we have courses ranging from pharmacy, from medical sciences to Unani medicine to IT and management, of course. And we are endeavoring, sir. We wouldn't say that we are the best anywhere. But our government has ranked us in the top 5 of the universities of Institute of Eminence, which was a Government of India initiative. In that light, I would say that okay, our efforts are on the right path, and we are striving our level best towards excellence. And that is a brief about the university. Uh, Professor Randolph Sen, sir, I hope I have pronounced your name properly. It is indeed a pleasure that you could spare your time to be here. And regarding the topic of organizational ethics in modern organization, the whole concept here of this webinar is to bring the industry academia interface. And I think we at Hamdard, and especially in the Department of Management, we believe that as educators, it is not only a vocation to impart education in management, but also it is imperative on us to strive for the holistic development of people. And this topic, organizational ethics in modern organization, is relevant to each and everyone. It is a very nice topic, and I'm sure that you have given a you must have deliberated on this, and this is so relevant for everyone in today's days and time. And most of the time what happens is I may be wrong in this, but when we say modern organization, we mean more efficient organizations, and we mean organizations which are more automated than people involved sometimes. That may be the connotation, or we do not take into consideration human values, but the business values are given more importance. That may be that is my understanding of what we understand as modern organizations, but and so much at the cost of the society and the environment as such. So somewhere or the other, in the larger scheme of things, ethics has taken a backseat, and monetary advantages have become the I think the driving force. And that is why this topic, I believe, is all the more relevant. And thank you, sir, for choosing this topic to discuss with the students. And please, all of you, as management professionals, please keep in mind that yes, you have to establish yourself and get on your feet, but do not do anything at the cost of society, and at the cost of your neighbors, and at the cost of your future customers as well. Don't dupe them. And ethics are very, very important, because that should be the spine, the circulatory system, everything that defines the organization. So I think sir will elaborate more on it. Uh, with these few words, uh, I'd like to thank once again Dr. Abdullah, the coordinator, and our head, who has asked me to give the opening remarks. It is indeed an honor for me to give the opening remarks. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, ma'am. Ma'am, now I would like to invite Dr. Sadaf Siraj, ma'am, to introduce the speaker for the session.
A very good morning to all of you, and a very good evening to Professor Sang. It gives me immense pleasure in welcoming and introducing the speaker of the session, Dr. Brandon Randolph Sang, Associate Professor of Management at Texas A&M University, Commerce. Professor Sang is a versatile researcher who has published about 85 research papers across various journals of high repute and has over 1,000 citations, several awards, and honors to his credit. His current research primarily examines the ethical and social cognitive factors in leadership, entrepreneurship, and teams. Dr. Sang teaches organizational ethics related courses both at the undergraduate and graduate levels. His consulting experience in the public sector ranges from local municipalities to larger defense related contractors. Dr. Sang has held various editorial positions in journals of high repute like Sage Open, Group and Organization Management, Management Decision, Journal of Applied Management and Entrepreneurship, Journal of Scientific Psychology, to name a few. He's been a textbook reviewer for publishers like Emerald, Wiley, Sage Publication, Pearson, McGraw-Hill, etc. Currently, he serves as the editor-in-chief in the journal Management Decision. Sir, it's a privilege to have you with us, along with us. And now, without taking any more time, I'll invite you to deliver your lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that introduction and warm welcomes. It's nice to be here with you. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Hopefully it will work okay. Let's see. I think it's working. Hopefully you can see that okay.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Now it is
Yes,
good.
sir.
Okay. Let me make it full screen for you. Let's see if this will work. Okay, here we go. So as was mentioned in my introduction, I'm going to talk about ethics in modern organizations. This, as was mentioned in the introduction, is a very important topic, especially as we try to encourage ethics among employees in particular, because research shows again and again that this is really the way you can have long-term success, not just in terms of employers being happy or customers being happy, but also in terms of profitability. So it's an important topic. Now, one thing that's really interesting about ethics is a lot of managers are a little hesitant to deal with ethics sometimes, because some of the situations you might get involved in can be a little hard to deal with, tough issues to deal with. One way that research shows that's good to deal with ethics is really to figure out how you're going to define it in your organization. And the way that you can really best define this idea of ethics is in terms of behavior that you can actually see your employees engaging in. If you try to define ethics in terms of just simply the character of the person, it's hard to always see that character, because people can claim to do one thing and then do other things. But if you actually look at their behaviors they engage in a work setting, then you can better define what ethics is all about. And so, as a manager, when we're trying to figure out how we can best influence the ethics of our employees, what research shows again and again is that really the thing that you can best control is the situational environment within the organization itself. You obviously can't really control the environment that people experience outside of the work setting. You can't necessarily even control someone's character, but what you can control is the environment that employees find themselves in. So the environment that they work in, that really is the area in which managers can have the most influence in terms of ethics. And so there's five major important situational or environmental factors within the organization that I want to talk about. So let's start first with work context in the self, as this is an important part of what people interpret themselves to be in different contexts. There's a really great quote by William James: "A person has as many different social selves as there are distinct groups of persons about whose opinion he cares." So in other words, we are different depending on the environment we find ourselves in terms of how we think of ourselves. So at the baseball game, we might define ourselves according to our favorite team. The dinner table, we probably define ourselves according to our family. At a cultural event, we might define ourselves according to our ethnic background, or our cultural background. And so in all these different contexts, we define ourselves or think of ourselves in different ways. The same is true with work context. I don't know why this isn't advancing here. For some reason oh, there we go. So in a work context, we really define ourselves once again according to how we see ourselves within that context. And this is really what social identity theory is all about, where we're defining ourselves in terms of group membership. And why do we do that? Well, it helps us feel better about ourselves as we identify as being part of a certain group of people. And it also makes the world a lot more certain. And so what's interesting is we can really stereotype ourselves and others. So it's not just that we're stereotyping others, we're also stereotyping ourselves according to the context that we find ourselves in. And so if we think about, well, what is the connection then between this idea of having multiple selves and ethics in a work context, what it really means is that we do behave differently depending on the situation we confront. So the situation, the environment that we find ourselves in, we do behave differently. And most people accept this fact that there is different rules and ethics for different contexts. And so we can look at the example of one person in particular who was known later on to engage in a lot of unethical things. Of course, we're talking about Ken Lay of Enron. He actually comes from a very interesting background. Poor preacher's son. He got a PhD in economics.
Excuse me, sir. Can you please put the slideshow in full screen mode?
Oh, is it not? It's in full screen on mine.
Okay. Maybe,
Do you
it
not
is
see the
not
full
moving.
screen?
No, sir, we are able to see the.
Yes, yes, you click this button, then it will become full screen.
What about now? Is it full screen?
No, not yet.
Huh. On my computer is full screen right now. I just got out of full screen. Let me see if there's maybe another way I can share. Let's try.
This will also do, at least we are able to see the slides now. The previously we were only stuck up on the first slide.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
That's strange. So my computer, it's been showing the slides. How about if I just do it this way? Is this better? You can see the slides this way?
Yes, sir, we can.
Yes, sir.
But
This
then
would
he
be
has
much
to
Okay.
better.
scroll it. He has to scroll all the slides. Whenever he's on a particular slide, he has to scroll it.
Okay, this
Okay,
way
so the
would
full
be better.
screen wasn't working then. I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
So we first talked about this idea of the work context in the self and the importance that plays. Now we look at this idea in terms of Ken Lay. Like I said, he has a really interesting background. Was known to actually be very giving and very charitable in the giving that he gave, especially in his hometown. But there's this other side of him where he was a extreme risk taker. He knew that his company was failing and failed to really tell anyone about it. Yet he was able to solve his stocks off and be okay. And so there's this interesting contrast where he acted very, very differently depending on the context he found himself in. So if we think about this in terms of being a manager, if we're lower on the totem pole and not very high in the company, it's difficult, right? It's difficult. What we really are trying to do is strive for integrity. And when we talk about integrity, we're really talking about a state of being complete or undivided. So we want to try to bring all those multiple selves together. And as managers, we want to try to encourage our employees to bring these multiple ethical selves together. But that always begins by kind of analyzing our own self and recognizing how we can be different depending on the context we find ourselves in. And so as a manager, we want to make no assumptions about ethics at work based on a person's life and other contexts. And so what we really want to do is build the norms and expectations in the work environment and make it clear what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. That leads us to this second factor called group norms. Once again, aspect of the environment that managers have control over in terms of ethics. We often hear this saying, I was only following orders, or that everyone's doing it or not doing it. What these really are social norms that people are putting forth and following. People do follow social norms, and they can have a really profound impact upon their behavior. Original experiment that really examined this idea was Ash's original research. This has been replicated many times since then, but it's interesting to think of this experiment and what it's teaching about human nature. So people were asked to compare the A line to the lines 1, 2, and 3. And they were asked either alone or with a group of people which line matched the best. And what they did is they rigged the experiment such that every 5 people before the person who was going to answer were purposely giving a wrong answer. So they would always say, for example, line 2. And so line 2 is obviously different than line A in terms of length. But what they found is that if a social norm was created such that everyone was saying that it was line 2, 30% of the time people would go with that, even though when they did it by themselves, 99% of the time they always got it correct. So this social norm was really powerful in influencing people even going with an obviously wrong answer. So if we apply this to the idea of leadership and ethics in organizations, unfortunately, group norms can be used really as what we might call a double-edged sword. It can really swing both ways. It can be used to encourage unethical behavior as well. So for example, there might be a norm set in a company that it's okay to inflate expenses to compensate for spending time away from home. Once again, the outcome of that is lying, but that's the norm. And so there's this group pressure of people being ostracized, and the group norms often trump any kind of formal roles that might be set in the organization, where it really all kind of boils down to loyalty. And so as a manager, recognizing these power of group norms, what you want to do instead is flip the norms on their head such that the being encouraged is the positive group norms instead of these negative group norms. Have loyalty to the group be in a positive way, in a way that builds up and supports both the employee and the organization. And that really leads us next to this idea of assigned roles. So beyond just the norms that exist in a work environment, there's also these assigned roles that we're given. There's certain roles that we have to engage in and work with. And these roles really align nicely with social roles, where we have these kind of cluster of norms. They're telling you how you're supposed to act in certain environments. There's really interesting stories, and this is one story in particular where you have a lady who's being kidnapped, and she's being kidnapped for a ransom. And what she actually does is she ends up joining the group and completely changing her social roles and going against everything that she supposedly believed in. And so we find once again that these social situations can move most normal people to behave in abnormal ways because of the environment. Another famous study that shows this is the Stanford prison study. You might have heard this before. In the Stanford prison study, people were randomly assigned to be either a prisoner or a guard, and they made a prison in a Stanford, was actually in the psychology building in the basement. And so the researchers wanted to see what would happen if people would just randomly assign these roles of prisoner or guard. And what ended up happening is people took those roles extremely seriously, such that abuses started to occur, and they had to shut the study down early. So once again, these social roles kind of become what the person thinks they are, where doing becomes believing. And so if we want to think of the connection between roles, ethics, and real life organizations, especially modern organizations, we have to realize as managers that people do enter work organizations in a state of role readiness. They have these kind of ethical selves ready. And so this can create conflicting roles where there might be pressures to be dishonest, such as corporate physicians, lawyers, accountants, where they take an oath as a professional in their profession, but they also are told to cook the books. And so they have to figure out how to manage both of these different types of ways of being. And so these roles can really be powerful influences on behavior. And one thing they can do is really reduce our sense of individuality. And when we stop thinking of ourselves as individuals and as just part of the crowd, we often can behave in ways that are unethical if that's just what everyone else is doing. And so, as managers, recognizing the powerful component, the roles people play in organizations are on ethics is an important thing to consider. And that really leads us to the fourth component here, responsibilities in groups. One thing I really like to do when I teach this in a classroom setting is have people do this anonymously. So they actually will write down their answers on a piece of paper and fold it up. And then I mix up all the piece of papers and read what people have to say. And so it is completely anonymous. There's no way I can actually trace it back to the person. And so once again, the idea here is if you're invisible for 24 hours, you're completely assured that no one will be able to detect or hold you responsible for your actions. What would you do? And so the reason I make this completely anonymous in a classroom setting, because I really want people to give their most honest response. And that's when people are willing to do that, if it's completely anonymous. And what's interesting, I've done this over the course of 10 years in lots of different courses and classes. And there is always a common theme that comes out of this. And the common theme is that people are willing to engage in illegal behavior and often negative behavior, violent behavior, as long as they can be completely invisible and no way that no one would ever know what they did. And so what's interesting about this is this really shows the important role that responsibility plays in ethics. In the real world, we see lots of instances where when people are anonymous, when society breaks down, that's when we get looting. That's when we get these mobs of people doing crazy things that they normally would never do. And so what seems to be going on here is a de-individualization. So loosening of normal constraints of behavior when you can't be identified. And research shows again and again that this does increase impulsive and deviant acts. Lots of research, once again, supports this, and lots of real life events support this. We have the Ku Klux Klan there, where they always hood their heads. We have in the bottom picture there this prison experiment where the guards actually made the prisoners de-individualized. We get into research looking at the internet and social media, listservs, and you find that in these, although not completely anonymous environments, but definitely more de-individualized environments, people are willing to be much more impulsive and negative and nasty in these environments. Really interesting study that looked at this just in terms of cars. So how much are you hidden inside of your car? Do you have a convertible or a Jeep where people can see in really easily? Or do you have a car that's completely enclosed? And so they got actually in front of people in different cars. And when the light turned red to go, the stoplight for the traffic turned red to go, they would just sit there and they wanted to see if people would honk at them. And they found that people were much more likely to honk at them if they were in more enclosed cars. So they were more anonymous because they didn't have a convertible or an open car where people could see them. So this idea of being anonymous or de-individualized, unfortunately, increases significantly a lot of the things you really don't want going on in your organization in terms of unethical behaviors. And so what seems to be going on here is we just are in this state of being where we're more de-individualized. We're more open to antisocial cues. And we become less self-conscious and much more group conscious. And so we kind of get swallowed into the crowd, so to speak. And we're willing to do things that normally we wouldn't be willing to do. Once again, there's an old study that really was the first to show this effect. they actually had 3 different groups of people who were waiting in a room, and they wanted to see how people would behave differently depending on the number of people who were in the room with them when smoke started to come out of a vent. And interestingly enough, they found pretty consistently with this idea that when people are alone or they cannot just assume that someone else is going to take care of it, they're much more likely in terms of time here to let people know that there's smoke coming out of a vent. Whereas if you have 2 people with a third person there, much slower response, and then very slow if in the third condition they actually had 2 people who were trained to ignore the smoke. So the social cues are such that, oh, it's not important, you don't need to worry about it. And as a result, people took way, way longer to let other people know that there was smoke coming out of a vent. So just a simple study that shows this, this finding of how important personal responsibility is. So if we want to apply this once again to real life organizations, modern day organizations, we find that personal responsibility really is a prerequisite for moral action. It's the personal responsibility that's important there. Now, in a work setting, unfortunately, we're often encouraged to turn our responsibility over to higher levels. And that's where you get this idea of no choice but to follow his boss's orders. And you also get this idea of groupthink that you learn about in different classes where decision making is harmed and people are not engaging in the critical thinking they need to. And the same thing happens when you have in a complex modern organization, the responsibility is being divided. And so people feel much more psychologically distant from the responsibility of their actions. And so all of these things in combination, unfortunately, encourages the likelihood of more unethical behavior. And so once again, as a manager, you have to figure out how to rearrange the environment so these factors aren't going on. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie To Kill a Mockingbird. Obviously, it's a famous American book as well. But at the end of the movie, they have an African-American man who's falsely accused and put in prison. And this is in the South, southern states of the United States of America, back in the older days. And what happens is Scout, who is this man who's standing here, who's the lawyer in the story's daughter, she does something that gets the mob to disperse, and it really goes back to this idea of responsibility. She ends up calling each of the individuals, because she lives in the town so she knows them, she calls each of the individuals by name and starts talking about their families. And what this does is it automatically kind of jolts people out of that groupthink and starts to making them self-aware. We find that self-awareness is really the opposite of a lot of these findings. The more self-aware you can make someone, the more likely it is they have greater self-control and more likely that their action is going to reflect their attitudes or their beliefs or their desires to be ethical. And so once again, as managers, the more you can help your employees be self-aware, the more likely it is that ethical behaviors result. The fifth and probably most important of these factors that managers have control over in their environments, in the organization, is the reward system. And the reward system really is the single most important formal influence on people's behavior at work. A lot of what we've talked about so far is really the informal influence on behavior. But this is obviously very formal because it's built into the system itself in terms of the business or the organization or the company. Now, incentives and goals do work well, but it also is important to recognize as managers that you can also unintentionally motivate unethical behavior. And so the classic example of this would be a salesperson who has modest salary but then gets commission for what it is that they sell. Obviously, they're not going to get as high of commission on items that are for sale because their commission is based on how much they did sell in terms of the price of the items. And if the manager's commission is also based on store sales, then that kind of takes that to one level higher. And so the easiest way that a salesperson can make the most money and thus the manager make the most money is to try to sell the higher priced items. And one way that you might try to sell higher priced items is to lie about them and to create false claims or false reasons why someone should buy those items. And so the system itself is rewarding unethical behavior in that example. So as a manager, it's really important to consider what kinds of attitudes and behaviors are being rewarded, not just explicitly, but also implicitly. How do people actually accomplish those goals? How is this possible? This is where SMART goals can actually come in handy, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard of SMART goals before. These are specific types of goals that you want to engage in, and each letter stands for the type of goal that you're making. All of these goals should really have high expectations for ethical behavior. And we find from social learning theory that people do learn a lot from watching the rewards and punishments of others. So the individual themselves don't have to experience that. They can see other people experiencing it. And it's really the same as if they had experienced it themselves. So in terms of unethical behavior, punishment can work. It can be tricky because it has to be perceived as fair, it has to be very swift, and really should be severe. It should match whatever it is the employee did. So for example, you have an employee who steals from the company, and this is verified. A very effective punishment for that, of course, would be to fire the person. It's swift, it's severe, and it should be perceived as fair because everyone would agree on the face of justice that stealing from the company is not something you should be doing. The other side of that, though, is also important to think about. So you can punish unethical behavior, but can you reward ethical behavior is one thing we can think about. And what research shows here is that really you shouldn't reward ethical behavior because it should be the standard or the norm. And so you should just expect that to occur. To reward it would suggest that the norm is to not have ethical behavior. So really the norm should be ethical behavior, and rewarding should come in maybe for someone showing forth a good example and those kinds of things, but not ethical behavior in and of itself. So positively reinforcing good behavior instead. So one thing that we learn in modern organizations is that sometimes things that seem crazy that happen in terms of ethics, where you get corruption, you get people really engaging in a lot of unethical behavior, lying about their profits, lying about what it is that they're taking from the company. So extortion, all the things that companies unfortunately get in trouble for and have been getting in trouble for over time, is that these processes are actually very normal social processes. And if we, as managers, don't recognize the influence of the environment and how we must control the environment, we must control the situation that employees find themselves in when they come to work. If we don't do that, the default, unfortunately, tends to go unethical. So we have to be very proactive and really think about what are the reward systems that are occurring. how do people see themselves at work, and how can we get them to align themselves in similar ways that they might in other settings, like in the family, where they're very ethical. How can we get them to also be ethical at work settings? How can we really control the group norms that are forming? How can we assign people to different roles in that organization that will encourage them to be ethical? And then, of course, how can we get people to be self-aware and feel responsible for their actions? And these are all the components that really allow managers to have the most influence in terms of ethics. You can't really control what's going on once your employee leaves work. You can't control the thoughts of the person. You can't control their character, but you can control the environment. And so that's an important key to remember and consider in all of this. And so if we understand the ordinariness of extraordinary evil, we're less surprised by evil, less likely unwitting contributors to evil, and better equipped to forestall evil. So that is really what I would have to say about ethics in the modern environment.
Thank you so much, sir. Thanks for a wonderful lecture. Now, house is open for the question and answer session by the audience.
Thank you.
Every student can ask the question, faculty members and research scholars.
I'm sorry that you couldn't see all my slides. I've shared my slides, so feel free to share them with anyone you want. It's not a problem.
Okay, no problem, sir. But we see in your slides later. So now anybody can ask the question from Brandon, sir, about this topic, organizational ethics in modern organization.
Good morning, sir, for a nice presentation. And
Thank you.
we are enlightened with your ideas on ethics in the current scenario. Just one point which you raised about the background of individuals as far as ethical practices are concerned. You took the example of the Enron employee and how he was raised up. So this factor is beyond our control, the background of employees, because it's a given. So how would you as a manager mitigate that risk if somebody is carrying a, let's say, a disturbed background or a negative background? Or how would you mitigate that risk in the future, that it does not spill on to his work life?
That's a great question. So obviously when you're hiring people, you do have to take their background into consideration. Obviously a lot of jobs will do background checks on people in terms of past criminal behavior. But also that's the importance of also getting references. But in terms of maybe things you couldn't identify when you were hiring the person, that's where I would say that once again, the thing that you can control the most is the environment that people find themselves in. And so maybe someone has a tendency to be unethical, but the environment really encourages positive ethics, then you're more likely to get that, even from someone who normally might not want to act that way, because social norms are so powerful of an influence upon human nature.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Dr. Abdullah, can you kindly unmute yourself?
Abdullah, unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. So, any other question on research topic? Sir,
So,
sometimes students ask about the current and latest topics of research in the subject. So, what are the different topics that scholars should choose on this topic related to this topic?
Did you ask what's the recent scholarship on the topic? Was that your
Uh,
question?
latest research topics on the subject.
Yeah. So there is a lot of research that investigates this idea of why social norms are such a powerful influence upon humans. And so a lot of research has investigated kind of looking across discipline. You might look into biology. You might look into what parts of the brain are activating when people engage in different behaviors. And we find that social norms really seem to have a almost primitive function in human brains, where we really are very strongly influenced by social norms, and they can get us to engage in very ethical behavior, but they can unfortunately also get us to engage in behavior that is unethical. So it really can work both ways, depending on what type of social norms are being communicated by the organization.
Any other question by the students or the faculty members and research scholars?
so, so do you think social media has encouraged group behavior, and people are becoming increasingly nastier because they can hide behind identities? Do you feel a shift in the overall uh, environment of the world? And most of the people can say whatever they want without repercussions in most cases.
Yeah. Yeah, that's that's the problem that new technologies have always faced over time. We see it now with social media and the influence it has in people's lives. And like I said, unfortunately, the way social media is designed, it encourages unethical behavior because it is more anonymous. It's something that really is kind of the opposite of a lot of the different things I discussed in my lecture, where it's not controlled, the environment is not controlled, and like you said, there is no people don't feel responsible for what it is they're saying. And so yeah, it's something that I think as a society or as a world we have to start creating social norms in these new environments, and technology often runs ahead of any kind of norms that might exist. And it's something that I think even as a society we need to consider, it being important for us to create positive social norms in these environments, because it is a problem. You're right.
One more question. You gave the example of To Kill a Mockingbird for self-awareness. Uh, uh,
Yeah.
One information, in India, To Kill a Mockingbird is a prescribed book for class 12 students, I believe, in CBSE. Uh, uh, you
Yeah.
told for increasing the self-awareness, if we individualize a person, if we know the name and the background of the person, then the person will tend to be more aware and will not comply into unruly group behavior. what other things that we can do for self-awareness?
Well, there's a lot of organizations where they'll encourage people to, for example, have pictures of their family in their, wherever it is they're working. So that's something that can help people actually be more ethical, is having pictures of their family members around. Even something as simple as a mirror, believe it or not. So if people see their physical faces, research has shown that actually increases ethical behavior, because you're much more self-aware if you just even see your image in a mirror, for example. So there's lots of things just in the environment itself, once again, that you can do as managers to encourage people to think of themselves as people and not just as another cog in the wheel of the organization.
We had one colleague who was working on spirituality at workplace. He did his PhD thesis on this. So, do you think spirituality at workplace could increase ethical behavior? Is that one of
Yeah.
the topics of research that students can undertake for their research?
Yeah,
Or is it?
there is actually lots of research in that area. I've done research in that area myself, and so if the students want to look at my video or my website, they can read some of my research I've done, and it's a little more complicated than that. If someone is identifying as a member of the company as opposed to a member of a religious organization, then that can be conflicting. So the key is, how do you align your maybe membership in a religious organization with the membership in the, as an employee in a company? Trying to align those two different identities is the key to making that work, it seems.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Any other question? If there is no question, then we'll proceed to end the program. Okay, thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for the wonderful
Thank you.
discussion. Thanks a lot, sir. Now I would like to invite Dr. Saidun Nisa ma'am to deliver the vote of thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Abdullah. Respected dignitary, my dear colleagues, member of the staff, and dear students, I am honored to give a vote of thanks on behalf of Department of Management, and we are extremely thankful to our chief guest, to our guest speaker, Professor Sang, for accepting the invite. Sir, we are honored and humbled that you have accommodated your busy schedule as per the Indian Standard Time. There were many pertinent points that you have raised today, and few of them are like multiple selves and ethics, where you focus that one should strive for integrity. And you have also raised an important point about social norms, where people generally follow group norms blindly without thinking whether it's right or wrong. So social situation can many times make normal people to behave in abnormal ways. And you have also discussed a very important concept of de-individuation and also a linkage between responsibility, work, and ethics. And one very important point that you have raised today was role of reward system in an organization and their role in ethical behavior. So I think all the points are very relevant and very important takeaways for all management practitioners. I would also like to extend my heartfelt thanks to our head of the department, who is not present today due to his busy schedule, and Professor Reshma Nasreen and Dr. Sadat Siraj, and all the facilitators who have made this webinar a success. This event would have not been possible without the relentless effort of Dr. Abdullah. We are indeed fortunate that he could lie with a researcher of your repute. So thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, ma'am. So uh, we can stop the program.
I want to say one
Yes,
thing. I'm
yes,
sorry
ma'am.
I'm barging in time and again.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Uh,
ma'am. Please
but
ask.
I think there are blessings in everything, and this pandemic has given this as a platform for us to meet you so digitally. Otherwise, maybe it might not have been possible for a webinar. The concept of
Yes, yes.
webinar has,
Otherwise,
so we'll take that as a blessing in disguise and hope everyone stays safe. Sir, it has been a pleasure interacting with you. We hope, sir, that in future also we find some common platforms to get together. Thank you so much.
thanks a lot, sir, again that you sit in night time for us. I think it is 11:30 p.m. in your clock.
Yes.
11:30
That's
p.m.
right.
and it is sleeping time. So thanks a lot,
And,
sir, that you have
and it
sacrificed.
is the weekend, and it is the weekend, Friday.
Yeah, Friday. Yeah, Friday's tomorrow for me, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed it. It's very interesting to hear what you have to say and the comments you have. So I appreciate that. Well worth my time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Now participants can leave. Thanks a lot.